All right. So we are now in part two of our lecture on research variables. And we left off with the comparison between continuous and discrete variable from the first part of our lecture. And then just a few review or just a quick review. So when you say continuous variable, okay, here. So when you say continuous variable, we're talking about a numerical variable that has unlimited number of values. Well, if we're going to optimize its capacity to produce that certain number of value, then there is no limit. But if we set a limit to a set of value, then it is called discrete. So that's the numerical characteristic of a discrete variable. However, we also mentioned that a discrete variable can also be a categorical variable. We will talk more on that later in this lecture. And we also mentioned that our continuous variable can be divided or expressed in fractions, and therefore it has an absolute zero value. So examples are your time, your height, your weight, and your age, and all other variables or all other numerical variables that has no limits or without setting a particular range or a limit of a particular value or range. All right. Now, I forgot to include that under your continuous variable, there are two specific types or two other types of variables under our continuous variable. And these are, okay, let me put it here. Okay, so we have first your interval variable, and then we have your ratio variable. Okay, so when you say interval variable, uh, there is okay, there is an upper and lower value or limit, and remember that the difference between these upper and lower limit have meaning. So difference of between two values have meaning. Okay. Now, while your ratio variable, on the other hand, okay, it is similar to your ratio or to your interval, except that, okay, similar to your interval, except that it has a clear definition of zero. With clear definition of zero. That is why, if we go back to our definition a while ago, the absolute zero value under our continuous variable, we are referring here to your ratio variable. Okay? So the absolute zero value is only true for your ratio variable. Now, for your interval, we can assume a certain negative value for this. Okay, so that's why one of the examples that were set, but not in absolute, because temperature can also be expressed in Kelvin, wherein there is no zero value, is your temperature. It's your temperature scale, okay, in terms of Celsius and Fahrenheit. Okay, degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm gonna share examples ng interval and ratio values. Okay, but remember, your ratio value is only until zero. So it cannot get a negative value. okay, or a negative number. So those are the two specific variables under our continuous variable. All right, yes. So I think we are now ready to talk more about the discrete or categorical variables. Okay, so again, let us go back to our first definition here of discrete. And we said that discrete variable has certain limits, or it has only, we define the range on where the values can be set only, and it can be both numerical and categorical. And we already gave example of your numerical discrete variables, so number of registered cars, children in the family, number of students in a class. So now let's talk about the discrete categorical variable. Okay, so we have your discrete categorical variables. Okay, now when we say discrete categorical variables, we are actually referring to a limited, okay, so there is a limited number of distinct, limited number of distinct qualitative categories. And these categorical variables, as what we have said, especially assuming the qualitative nature of this variable, can't be expressed in fractions. Okay. Well, of course, you cannot express any variable that is non-numerical in fractions, so therefore you have those. All right. Okay. So what are some of the examples under our uh, discrete categorical variable? We have sex or gender. Remember that gender is different from sex. So sex is your biological composition, while gender is more of the identity that a person assumes. Okay. Then we also have blood group. Okay. So blood type A, B, ABO, A plus, A minus. Can we also consider ethnicity as a discrete variable? Yes, because there's only a limit or a certain number of ethnicity. So may limit lang siya. Okay. Now, just like interval and ratio variables under our continuous, in our discrete categorical variable, we also have subtypes. And what are these subtypes? Our first subtype is your ordinal variable. And we have your nominal variable. Now, it's quite easy to understand the difference between the two, because when we say ordinal, our key word here is rank, or this is what we call as your ranking variable. Your ordinal variable is considered as a ranking variable. And then the ranking variable, or how we're going to rank the variable, takes a logical order. So logical order of ranking. Okay. Such as, like, okay, examples there we have your t-shirt sizes, or your size, general, like extra small, large, or clothing. Sorry, not t-shirt. T-shirt is very specific. I think let's have clothing instead. Okay, so clothing size, like your large, medium, extra large, and so on and so forth. Then we also have here your numerical academic grades. Okay, your numerical academic grades. Okay, such as your A plus or your A minus, your B plus or B minus, and so on and so forth. And your Likert scale. Okay, like your Likert scale. For example, a degree of agreeness. Okay, like agree, disagree, strongly disagree, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's under our ordinal variable. Now, the numerical variable, on the other hand, okay, uh, in here we really cannot organize the variables whose values cannot be organized in a logical sequence, but rather you can organize them according to um, a shared characteristic. Okay, so organizing according to a shared, or not just only one, it could be several. Okay, according to shared characteristics. Okay, according to shared characteristics. So that's how we describe your nominal variable. Okay, and another simple understanding of your nominal variable is categories. Okay, we're grouping our variables according to categories. I have already mentioned a while ago. So we have here examples. We have your sex or gender, then your civil status, your ethnicity, okay, and so on and so forth. Now remember that your nominal variables are qualitative. Okay, so they really assume a full qualitative nature or qualitative characteristics. Likewise with your ordinal as well. However, not in an absolute sense, because in an ordinal variable can also somehow assume a numerical nature. Let's say, for example, if you're going to rank the top 5 reasons why Filipinos still get out of their homes amidst the quarantine policies, and then you get you arrange the responses according to the number or to the frequency of answers, and then the option with the most answers will be ranked as first, second, and third, or I mean first, and then followed by the next highest number of responses, and so on and so forth. So somehow we arrange the variables according to the number of frequency. So there is um, a numerical perspective, okay, on such organizing, or a numerical perspective of such nature. All right, okay, yes. So I hope that's already clear. Now we're supposed to proceed with the next, but let me give you other types of your categorical variable. And these are, okay, other types of your categorical variable include your dichotomous and your polycotomous, or dichotomous and polycotomous variables. Okay, so let's have your number 3, we have your dichotomous variable. And for your number 4, we have your polycotomous variable. Now, this is also easy to distinguish or differentiate because when we say dichotomous, we base it on the prefix dicho, which means two. Oh, sorry. Okay. Dicho, which means two, that means that a particular variable only assumes two categories or two classification only. Okay, so two category. Okay. All right, or two classification. So what are some of the examples of your dichotomous? Of course, we have your sex. Okay, so these are examples. Sex, male and female, but gender, it's not dichotomous because there are so many gender categories. So we will categorize gender later, no? Kung sa diin na siya. So we have sex, and then another example of dichotomous will be presence, whether it is present or absent, diba? So it could be present or absent only. You cannot be, you cannot say you're physically present but mentally absent. Even though you're there, even though you're not listening to your teacher, you're still present, okay? Then we also have veracity. Veracity, okay? Veracity, like true or false. So there's no middle ground, okay? Tandaan, if we say dichotomous, only two categories. While polycotomous, on the other hand, more than two. Okay, from poly, which means many, or more than two. Okay, so diri na masulod, or it is where now we add your gender. Yes. Diba, uso subong we have, they say non-binary. What else? Um, Heterosexual, homosexual, transsexual. Okay, so there are already various gender identity categories, so they fall under your polycotomous variable. Okay, and then what else? Of course, we have here also your educational attainment. So you could say you could be a college graduate, a post-college graduate, undergrad, or a doctor's degree holder, and so on and so forth. Okay. Level of performance can also be level of something. Okay, so it could be level of performance, level of academic performance. Okay, that could be, or your Likert scale is an example of your polycotomous variable. All right. Okay, so I will just add other types in this classification. Okay, I will just add other types of variables since they could be classified under here. So we'll just talk about the other types of variables, okay? So let me discuss the other types. So other types of variables so that we can be familiar with this. Now, the first on the list is your attribute variable. Okay, so what do we know, or how do we say that this is an attribute variable? Now, remember that when we say an attribute variable, we are talking about, okay, fixed attribute of what? Of a person, a thing, or a phenomenon. when do we use or when do we identify attribute variable? Class, remember that we identify your attribute variable usually if we wanted to set criteria. Okay, so this is identified during um, inclusion criteria setting. Okay, so let me talk about what do we mean by inclusion criteria setting. So when I say inclusion criteria setting, let's say I wanted to include or I wanted to um, select senior high school students as my subject or my participants for the study. But we know that senior high school students may have a lot of attributes or characteristics, but you need to be specific because your goal is specific only for certain number of attributes. So in there, you set, okay, you only limit or you only filter or let's say identify certain attributes of senior high school students that you will include in your study. So let's say assuming you set your inclusion criteria and then you say, okay, sir, I wanted to conduct a study on senior high school students, but then they need to be only grade 12 grade 12 students only, sir, and then exclusive only for the academic track. Okay, and they should not be less than 18 years old, so only 18 years old and above. So your grade 12, your academic track, and your 18 years old all fall or can be identified as your attribute variables. And remember, these variables cannot be changed or manipulated by the researcher because they are inherent of the person or their object that you are selecting. Okay, next. Okay, next one, we have another type and we call this your latent versus manifest. So I'll just cluster them together. Okay, latent variable versus manifest variable. Okay, so distinguishing characteristics between the two. So when I say a manifest variable, this can be directly observed from the name itself, manifest, so easily identified. Okay, they can be easily identified, while latent variables, on the other hand, naman niya, cannot be directly observed. So you need to use certain tools for you to actually gather these type of variables. Okay, now and of course, it's not easily identified. So that's how you're going to categorize your latent versus manifest. So when I say manifest variable, so for example, you are conducting a study on anxiety or fear, diba? Especially for our human students. Now, anxiety or fear, let's say, what are some of the physical characteristics or like facial expression that will tell you that the person is anxious or afraid? So we consider them to be manifest variable because when you see the expression, you would automatically get an idea. Oh, okay, he's afraid because his eyes are turning left and right as if like scanning the environment, and then he looks restless. He keeps on moving back and forth. He's not calm. So that's a manifest variable because you could easily see it. However, anxiety and fear can sometimes be concealed inside a person. So a person might be afraid without really showing it, but if you let him answer a series of questions, for example, in a survey form or in a questionnaire, and then and then they would respond that okay, they're feeling worried, they have the thoughts of of uncertainty in terms of the future, of what the future holds for them. So you would identify, okay, that person is anxious, but he's not seeing it. So the anxiety there is now a latent variable because you have to use tests, you have to use certain tools for you to identify if those variables indeed exist. Okay, now let's proceed to the last one for this part of our video. And this is now your exogenous versus your endogenous variable. Now, for the latent and manifest, exogenous and endogenous, it's easy to understand because they are actually opposite with each other. So when we say exogenous variables, so these are identified outside the research model. Okay, outside the research model, while your endogenous variables are determined inside the research model. Okay. Now, to make this simply, because we haven't touched on conceptual frameworks and our schematic diagrams yet. But just to give like a quick roundup between exogenous and endogenous variable. When I say exogenous variable, these are variables that exist outside your framework or your limitation. Isn't it that when we do conduct a study or when we do researches, we make a diagram of what variables to include only, how are they going to interact with each other, and all these variables that you include in your diagram are your endogenous variables because they exist within the research model. Now, all variables outside or not mentioned in that diagram or in that map is considered an exogenous. So later when we discuss about experimental and non-experimental variables, you would know, okay, so if this variable does not exist within the model, they can be confounding or extraneous. All right. So that's how we're going to understand it. But the main or the basic principle here, class, so that you will not be confused, is that endogenous variables usually are the active variables that have direct participation with each other. Okay. While your exogenous variables they could be extraneous and might be able to confound, not extraneous or extra, might be able to confound the interaction within the active variables. All right, so I think we wrap up our part two. Please stay tuned and look forward or uh, yes, check on part three. Thank you.